We have the chanting during the meal. This is a tradition that was established by Ajaan Fuang. He noticed that people would come to the monastery, present food to the monks, and then while the monks were having their meal, they'd sit around and chat. He said it would be better if they used their powers of speech to praise the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and to think about the Dharma, think about why we're meditating, why we're practicing. Someone once came here and said, well, why do we have to entertain the monks with our chanting in the morning while they eat? And let me tell you, it's not entertainment. It's good for everybody involved. We get to hear the Dhamma. You get to chant the Dhamma and think about it. It helps keep people's minds on why we're here, what we're doing as we practice. We think about the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. There are examples for how people find true happiness, a happiness that's not harmful to anybody, and how we should take their example as we look for our happiness. Because too many people in the world are really irresponsible about how they go for happiness. They just grab whatever pleasures they want, whatever they can get their hands on. And what kind of long-term consequences this is going to have for them or for the people around them, they don't really care. There's a lot of that in the world. And we've seen where that leads. So we don't want that in our lives. And we see with the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha that there is another example. There is a true happiness that we can find by being skillful, by being harmless. So we're going to keep that goal in mind. We're going to keep that principle in mind, that we're going to be responsible as we look for happiness. Then we have the reflections on the body, reflections on how the world is swept away. Again, to remind ourselves, if you're looking to the body, looking to the world outside for your happiness, you're looking in the wrong place. Now you use your position in the world, or you use the fact that you've got a body to practice. Use these things as tools for the sake of the mind. And then we end with the Four Brahma-viharas, extending goodwill to all beings, including ourselves. Goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy. These are all part of a set. Goodwill is the desire for happiness. Compassion is what you feel when you have goodwill, when you see people who are not happy, who are suffering, or doing the causes that will lead to suffering. Empathetic joy is when you see people who already are happy, or are doing things that will lead to happiness. And then there's equanimity. That's a little bit of an outlier, but it's necessary. Because you realize, simply because you wish happiness for all beings doesn't mean it's going to happen. After all, beings are happy or unhappy based on their choices. And they're perfectly free to choose all kinds of things. And sometimes the results of those actions come and there's nothing much you can do about them. So the thought of equanimity is to focus you back on where you can make a difference. As the passage says, all beings are the owners of their actions. Well, what are your actions? What are your actions today going to be? Think about that. And if you can see that they're in line with the example set by the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, then you're on the right track. So as you chant, think about it. Don't just parrot the words. Think about why those passages were chosen and make the most of them. That way, even though there's no entertainment value, at the very least, there's something of real value as you keep yourself rightly directed. That, the Buddha said, is a blessing. Close your eyes and find your breath. If you're not sure where the breath is, take a couple of good long, deep in and out breaths. In other words, create breath sensations in the body. And if they're comfortable, stick with them. If not, you can change. This is one of the main lessons of meditation, is you have some freedom here in the present moment. You can choose to focus on all kinds of things. You can focus on how cold and wet you are, but what does that do? You can focus on the fact that the breath energy is moving in the body, and you can change the way it moves. You can make it move in a way that gives more nourishment to the body. If you look at it in that way, what does that do? This is how you develop discernment, by trying things out and then looking at the results. This is what underlies the quality that the Buddha called analysis of qualities. As you make comparisons in the mind. We hear so much about how wisdom is about seeing the oneness of all things. But the Buddha said, no, wisdom comes from seeing things in pairs and making judgments. You do this, what are the results? You do that, what are the results? Which is better? And then you try a third thing, make comparisons, which is better then? Keep on trying to get better and better as you make comparisons inside. This is how you see things. This is how discernment works. And it's the most reliable way of coming to some true conclusions inside. In other words, you don't just believe what other people say. You look for yourself. And you have to learn how to look. It's not just a random looking, or looking in whatever way you feel inspired to. You have to stop and think. You have to be systematic about this. We're working on goodness, we're working on happiness. Some people don't like the idea that goodness and happiness can be a skill. They'd prefer that it be spontaneous, serendipity. But that means pain and suffering are also spontaneous, serendipity. And if you want some protection from the suffering that the mind can cause itself, you have to learn how to create the causes for happiness. So it's for our well-being that we try to master these things as a skill, master the ways of the mind as a skill. As the Buddha said, once you learn how to master the ways of the mind, then you can think the thoughts you want to think, and you don't have to think the thoughts you don't. Now we can protect yourself from suffering, because the suffering that weighs down the mind isn't the suffering that comes in from outside. It's the suffering that the mind creates for itself. When you learn how not to create that suffering, then you're released, you're free. So it starts with simple things like this, acting one way, then acting another way, making a comparison, which is better. And as your sensitivity and discernment develop, you find that you can rely on them more and more, so that happiness and goodness can become a real skill in your mind, something you can depend on. Close your eyes and settle in with your breath. Watch it all the way in, all the way out. Try to be dependable in staying here. You're trying to find a refuge inside, and the refuge is going to be yourself, your own mind, which means you have to develop good qualities in the mind. Because we're born into this world, we realize that very early on that we have to depend on others. And yet we find that after a while we can't depend on them for everything. A lot of things we have to look after for ourselves. So we've got to train ourselves. And this is a process that goes on and on and on. Sometimes we like to think we finally found something outside that we can depend on, or something inside we can depend on. It turns out, whoops, no, it's not the case. So we have to keep on looking. If you're looking into the mind, though, you find that there are good potentials. That's learning how to make the most of these potentials. That's where your refuge is going to lie. So we develop mindfulness by staying with the breath, remembering to stay with the breath. We develop alertness by watching how it's going. Is it comfortable? Does it feel right for the body right now, the way you're breathing? It should feel right. After all, it's the force of life. So if it feels constricted, if it feels tight, or it feels you're not getting enough of it, make adjustments. That's the good thing about the breath. It's one of the elements of the body, one of the functions of the body that you can control. And so learn how to make the most of that potential. Learn how to control it well. And you find that as you're doing it, you develop those good qualities in the mind. Qualities of dependability. You can depend on your mindfulness. You can depend on your alertness. You can depend on your desire to do this well. And as you see the results coming more and more, that desire gets stronger and stronger. You're more and more convinced that this is where it's going to be found, your inner refuge. Now the breath itself is not the refuge, it's a crutch, as Ajaan Fuang would say, to get you to the mind itself. Because after all, at some point we're going to have to leave this body, leave this breath. And then what do we have? We have the cravings and clingings of the mind. So at the very least, make sure that you develop some good cravings and clingings. It's not the case that craving and clinging are all bad. You can crave the end of suffering. You can cling to a right view. You can cling to the practice. These are good things to crave, good things to cling to. Because when we can no longer stay with the body, this is all we have. As the Buddha said, this is what takes us to the next life, just as wind takes fire to another, from one house to another. So make sure that you train your cravings and train your clingings in the right direction. The ultimate freedom, of course, is when you can let them go, but before you let them go, you want to get good use out of them. And you won't be able to know how to let them go until you really know them well. So pay attention right here. Keep consistently watching right here. Because right here is where all the potentials for good qualities of the mind can be found. It's right here that refuge can be found. But if you want something you can depend on, you have to be dependable in looking for it and practicing for it. And that's how those good qualities have an opportunity to grow. Close your eyes. Start with thoughts of goodwill. A wish for your own happiness, a wish for the happiness of others. A wish to find happiness in a way that your happiness doesn't conflict with that of others. Meditation is one of the ways you do that. Generosity, virtue, those are also ways in which you do that. As the Buddha once said, discernment begins with the question, what when I do it will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? Realizing that long-term welfare and happiness has to depend on not harming anybody else. Because if your happiness harms them, they're not going to stand for it. They're going to do what they can to destroy your happiness. But if your happiness is entirely harmless, and if it comes from within, nobody has to know about it. You don't have to show anything. As John Lee once said, if anyone knows what good things you've got, you're not safe. So you've got to make sure that you don't show them. But the happiness is there. And that's what matters. So cultivate your resources inside. This is how you show goodwill for yourself and for other people. Because the meditation is not purely an intellectual exercise. We do it in the context of being generous and being virtuous as well. And the lessons we've learned from generosity, the lessons we've learned from virtue, will help us in our meditation. There's a place where the Buddha once said where if you're stingy, you can't even get into the jhanas, to say nothing about getting to the higher attainments. So think about that. What do you learn from generosity? What do you learn from virtue that you can apply to developing your own mind? And a lot of it has to do with goodwill. When you're generous in the right way, you give gifts that don't harm anybody. They don't harm you. In other words, you're not overextending yourself. And they don't harm the person who's receiving them. You're not placing undue burdens on that person. And at the same time, they don't harm anybody else. And it's still possible to find happiness that way. Part of it, of course, lies in learning to talk to yourself about what a good thing it is that you're doing. That increases the happiness. Which means when you're sitting down to meditate, pay attention to how you're talking to yourself. How you learn how to appreciate the areas in the body that are comfortable, that are okay, and learn how to make the most of that. The same with virtue. You learn how to take joy in the fact that you're not harming anybody. And then you look at the way you meditate. Make sure that you talk to yourself in a way that doesn't harm yourself. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned from being generous, being virtuous, that then apply to the mind. And as we practice all these things together, then our practice is complete. We develop all aspects of the heart and mind. It's because they're developing together that they're all healthy. It's like exercising. You want to make sure you exercise all the muscles in your body so that they help one another. If one set of muscles is really strong and everything else is weak, that pulls the body out of alignment. It's bad for everybody. And the same with the good qualities in the mind. You want to develop the good qualities all around, your generosity, your virtue, and your meditation. Know where your mind is in line with the Dharma. When you focus on the breath, we're focusing on the force of life. We can go without food for a couple of days, go without water for a while, but we can't go very long without breathing. This is what keeps us in touch with the body. So we can use the body to learn about the world and act in the world. So pay careful attention to the breath. Look at the quality. Does it feel nourishing? If it doesn't, what would be required for it to be nourishing? Longer, shorter, deeper, more shallow? Or just more attention? We usually don't pay much attention to it. We take it for granted. After all, if we don't focus on the breathing, it'll pretty much do it on its own. So we think that we don't have to worry about it. But if you give it some attention, you'll see that it has a lot of potentials, creating a sense of well-being here. It's like that can suffuse through the body. And when the mind has a good place to stay in the body, it's more willing to settle down. And when it settles down, then it can see itself clearly. Otherwise, it's running around. And all it sees as it runs is its shadows, either running before it or running behind it. When we sit down and are with the breath right here, we can see awareness in the present moment, right here. We can see where that awareness is going, which intentions it goes for, which perceptions, and you can begin to ask yourself, why? When I go for a certain thought, where does it lead? And if it leads to a place that's not really good, why do I go there? What are the perceptions you've developed around that kind of thinking? There are so many things we do again and again, and we realize that they're not really all that satisfying. Yet we fall for them again, because we haven't really looked carefully at what is it that makes us go for them. The Buddha calls us looking for the allure. If you really want to know your own mind, look for the different allures that it goes for, the bait on the hook. And why I say that sometimes you know that something is bait and there's a sharp hook, but you still go for it. You have to look into that. Now, being with the breath in the present moment puts you in a better position to see this and to do something about it. Because the only pleasures you know are the ones that have hooks. You think that's part of pleasure. You just have to accept that. But the Buddha says there are a lot of pleasures that don't have hooks. And one of them is the pleasure that comes from getting in touch with the breath and going to know the breath, cultivating the breath. So try to cultivate this awareness, the awareness of the breath in the present moment. because it puts you in a position of power where you have more and more control over your own mind. And when you have more control over the mind, you have more control over your life. This is a really good place to be, a very fruitful place to be. So give it some time. After all, if the breath has been ignored all this time, it's like a child has been ignored. We pay attention to it, it gets scared. You have to show that you mean well. And then it will show what potentials it has. The Buddha found that those potentials could go all the way to awakening. So you can check to see for yourself, how far are the potentials of your own breath? How far can they go? They're right here. Try to make the most of them. The Pali word for meditation, bhavana, means to develop. And you develop good qualities in the mind not only when you're sitting here with your eyes closed, but also as you go through the day. The more the mind is centered, the more it's in a position of strength where it can do that. So when it's time to sit and meditate, give your attention totally to the meditation. This is your center, this is your home. It's from here that you're going to be operating. So make this a comfortable place to stay. It's comfortable both in terms of the breath. Notice how different ways of breathing feel right now, and if you find something that is especially captivating, stay with that. And also comfortable in terms of the thoughts that go through the mind. The way you talk to yourself, be encouraging. Lift the mind up. Realize that this is a really good thing you're doing here. When the Buddha would give his talks on Dhamma, there were 4 verbs they would use to describe what he did. One was to instruct, in other words, to give information. And the other 3 were encouragement, to arouse, encourage, to urge. And so learn how to rouse your mind, encourage it, urge it, in whatever way is appropriate, whatever way gets the best results. There's sometimes you have to be gentle with it, consoling, comforting. Other times you have to be a little bit harsher, lay down the law. Learn how to read your mind, see what it responds to best. And then once you've done all the work of developing the center right here as you're sitting and meditating, don't throw it away when you get up. There's an image in the canon of people who have their meditation on their lap. It's with them when they sit, but when they get up, it falls off the lap and just stays there on the ground. So don't let your meditation be like that. Carry it around. It's something precious. Think of the image in the canon of the man with a bowl of oil on his head. He's walking along, he doesn't want to spill a drop. Now you can think about that image in different ways. In the canon they have the image of the man following behind him with a sword. If the first man drops even a drop of oil, he's going to get his head cut off. But then you can think of Ajaan Lee's image. You've got something really good there in the bowl. You want to protect it. Instead of thinking of oil, you might think of good food. You'll make sure the flies don't land on the food. In other words, as soon as any of the hindrances come up, you shoo them away. That way you've got this position of strength that you can carry with you as you go through the day. And develop good qualities as you're talking with other people, as you're engaged in different activities. You're coming from a position of strength. So once you've created this position, don't just throw it away. Carry it around as your most valuable possession, and it will reward you. So give it the care and attention that it deserves. Focus on the feeling of the breath. And then talk to yourself about the breathing. What's there to say? Well, now the breath is coming in, now the breath is going out. Next question is it comfortable? Does it feel right for the body right now? You can check, you can try different kinds of breathing. Ajaan Lee recommends starting out with some deep, long breathing to wake things up inside. And as long as that feels refreshing, keep it up. Because a lot of us go around with depleted oxygen levels to begin with, so we need to up the oxygen. But the important thing is how you talk to yourself about this, about the possibilities of working with the breath. The benefits are going to come. In any case of delayed gratification, you've got to talk to yourself well. Remind yourself, okay, you're giving up some immediate pleasures right now. You could be thinking about anything you wanted to think about, but you decide, no, I'm going to focus on the breath. And even though the breath, the first time you breathe in, breathe out, may not be all that refreshing, you trust that it's going to get better. You've had some experience already. So a lot of this depends on how you talk to yourself about this. You see examples of children and little animals getting really upset when mommy or daddy goes away just for a little while. Because what are they telling themselves? Total abandonment. They don't realize that the parents are planning to come back. It's because they don't know how to talk to themselves that they suffer. Well, this habit sticks with us. It's not just little kids and little animals. Adults don't know how to talk to themselves either, in most cases. They picked up all kinds of ideas from who knows where. And oftentimes just something comes bubbling up in the mind randomly, takes over your life. So you have to learn how to talk to yourself, realizing that giving up certain immediate pleasures that entail a long-term pain is really worth it. And although you may not appreciate it right now, you learn how to get some pleasure out of the fact that you're rising above the tendency to go for what's going to be harmful in the long term. In other words, you talk to yourself in a way that provides happiness and keeps you directed in the right direction. As Ajaan Lee once said, of the various kinds of fabrication, verbal fabrication is a big troublemaker. How you talk to yourself. But it can be turned around. It can be a big help. Think about the Buddha. All those many times in the course of his quest for awakening, he ran up against a dead end. He went to these teachers and they promised him the end of suffering. Well, they didn't have it. You can see that. He tried torture, self-torture. That didn't work either. What was there left? He figured there must be a way around this. There have been Buddhas in the past, they must have figured this out. And it's because there's confidence that there was a way out that he could find it. So a lot of that had to do with how he talked to himself. So look at the way you're talking to yourself, especially at times when the mind's starting to get upset about something. Stop and ask yourself, can you talk to yourself about this in a different way, a way that's more skillful? And if nothing else, fall back on the breath. Because if you can talk to yourself well about the breath, you can get a lot of advantage out of just simply being with the breath, gaining strength, gaining stability inside. And it's the talking to yourself that eventually becomes one of the factors of jhana, and the jhana gets you really settled well. And that's when you start saying, oh yes, there is some pleasure in this practice. It was worth all the effort to get here. And once you're here, of course, why leave? Try to maintain that sense of well-being with the breath as you go through the day. It may not be as intense as you're out walking around, but it keeps you in touch. So the next time you come to sit down and meditate, you're right here. It's in this way that your happiness becomes a skill. Close your eyes and watch your breath. Watch it all the way in, all the way out. Each time you breathe in, each time you breathe out. Try to keep your awareness continually right here. Once you make up your mind to keep it here, you begin to notice how much it wanders. It peeks into the breath for a bit. It's okay, I know that. It has in and out, that's about it, and then it wanders off someplace else. Actually, there are lots of ins and outs to the breath. There's long breathing, there's short breathing, heavy, light, fast, slow. And each of these ways of breathing is going to have an impact on the body. So try to breathe in a way that feels really good, feels really right for the body and right for the mind right now. Because you want to get the mind so it can stay here continually. We live by our actions. We shape the world with our actions. Where do the actions come from? They come from our intentions. Our intentions come from the mind. And where do they happen? They happen right here in the present moment. But for the most part, we're not fully here. We give a few directions and then we go running off. It's like a chairman of a company who gives a few directives to the workers and then goes off and has a vacation. Comes back and checks up a little bit every now and then and goes back off again. And as a result, the chairman has no idea what's really going on. Because the workers in the company can make things look a certain way, even though they're doing something else. It's the same with the mind. The mind is very rarely honest with itself about what its intentions are. And so if you look a little bit, you begin to say, oh, there's nothing but good intentions, I've got a good mind. But then the question is, why do we go through life and doing things that make suffering for ourselves and suffering for other people? There's something we don't know about what's going on. So we've got to look more carefully and look more continually. Because some of the causes and effects in the mind have a cause that gives rise to an immediate effect, and others have causes that give rise to effects only over time. And you're going to see the connection only if you're here over time as well. To make another analogy, it's like watching a TV show or a movie. If you go in and out of the room and occasionally catch up on what's going on, you don't really know what's happening. To understand the plot, to understand the whole story, you have to stay there and watch it all the way through. It's in this way that we clear up a lot of our ignorance about what's going on in the mind. And the less ignorance we have, the less suffering we'll cause. The less suffering we cause for ourselves, the less suffering we cause for other people around us. So try to develop a continual awareness right here. And take advantage of the fact that you can adjust the breath so it becomes a good place to stay. That way you give rise to a sense of well-being. And when you're coming from a sense of well-being inside, it's easier to wish for the well-being of others and to act for the well-being of others, because you have this sense of well-being and a sense of strength and the clarity of knowledge, all of which are needed to act skillfully, to shape your life in a skillful way. There was once a senior monk from Bangkok who came to see Ajaan Mun. This monk's teacher had been a great admirer of Ajaan Mun, but this monk in himself didn't have much use for the forest monks. He didn't see what people sitting out in the forest with their eyes closed would know. Whereas he'd been studying all these books for years and years and years in Bangkok, and lots of well-known scholars, well-known preachers, and there's still a lot that he didn't understand about the Dhamma. And so he asked Ajaan Mun. So when I'm in Bangkok, there are a lot of problems I have, and I don't know who to go to, even though there are lots of people I could ask. But you're sitting out here in the forest all alone. Where do you hear the Dhamma? And Ajaan Mun's answer was, I hear the Dhamma 24 hours a day, except when I'm asleep. The monk was chastised a little bit. It sounds that you really know how to listen. Because the Dhamma is broadcasting all the time. It's like a radio station that's always broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The truth is out there. The truth is in here, showing itself very clearly. But we're tuned into other stations. Stations that dress things up in different ways, to hide the way things are. The stations that tell us, you want to find true happiness, you buy our things. Others that say, you want to find true happiness, well, you have a relationship. And even though they have to use reality in order to get the message to you, they distort it. And it's up to you to decide which station you're going to listen to, because the Dhamma is always there. The body is always proclaiming its nature. It's inconstant, stressful, not self. That's the side you can look at that helps to develop some dispassion, because that's what the Buddha said. The highest of all dhammas is dispassion, because that allows the mind to be freed. Now, things do have their constant side, and they do have their attractive side, and have that aspect that's under control. But if you focus on those in the wrong way, you're going to stay a slave to whatever they're trying to sell you, or whatever you're trying to sell yourself. So you learn how to look at things that are constant and under your control so that you can turn them into a path. Because that control is going to be temporary, but you want to make use of it while you can. But always keeping that other station in mind, the one that says you want to go for dispassion. You want to outgrow your attachment to things. It's basically a message to grow up. If you listen to that station all the time, because then your mind is in line with the truth. And when you're in line with the truth, what is there to fear? It's when we go against the truth that there's always that fear that the truth will sometimes show itself. And then what are we going to do? We're not prepared. But if you're with the truth all the time, then there's nothing to fear. So listen to the Buddha's station, listen to the station of the Dhamma. It's there to help you see things in such a way that you can make yourself free. Try to get in touch with your breath. Ride with it. And if the mind wanders off, just come right back. Wanders off again, come back again. You have to show your determination, because that's what makes the difference between ordinary concentration and the kind of concentration we're trying to develop. Ordinary concentration comes in little bits and pieces. You focus on something for a while, and then you have a lapse, and then you focus again, and have a lapse, or maybe focus someplace else. It's not all that continuous. It takes a real effort to follow, say, when someone's talking, all the way from the beginning all the way to the end. Or when you're reading a book, to keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. So we're trying to stitch together these moments of concentration as we meditate, and it's our determination that stitches them together. It's not going to happen on its own. There's a lot of talk about how the path is just allowing the mind to find its true nature. But the mind has all kinds of natures inside, all kinds of tendencies. And you're trying to strengthen the good ones and weaken the bad ones. That's why you need determination, because otherwise the mind slips back into its old haphazard ways. We're trying to make the meditation the opposite of haphazard. It's determined. You're going to stick with it all the way through. So each time there's a lapse, just come right back, come right back. Don't get discouraged. The more quickly you can catch yourself and come right back, the more you're going to see. You begin to see the moments when the mind has its secret decision that it's going to go someplace else, and then it pretends that it didn't do that. It was like the dog we had in Thailand. It would come up in the evening when the monks were having their evening allowables, and if you didn't give anything right away, he would scratch your leg, and if you looked down at him, he would look away, as if he hadn't done anything. Well, the mind acts like that. The committee member that wants to go someplace else, it will pretend like it's not there. But if you can catch it as it's laying its seeds for distraction, you can destroy the seeds. The mind can settle in. Have a lot more continuity in its concentration. And the more continuous your concentration, the more you're going to see things from the beginning to end. So remind yourself, you're stitching together little bits and pieces here, but you're trying to make them into something whole and strong. And that strong concentration is not going to be found anywhere else but aside from stitching together what little concentration pieces you've got. So protect them, maintain them, and show some determination. When you're focused like this, that's when things come into sharp relief. To stay mindful, you need a frame of reference. Because once you've got the right frame of reference, then it's obvious what needs to be done. So notice when the Buddha has you practice right mindfulness, he starts with the body in and of itself, literally the body in the body. This is not the body in the world. If that were your frame of reference, then you have to worry about how your body looks, whether it's strong enough to do the work that needs to be done in the world. All the issues that have to do with having a body in the world, which is what we normally do. That's what becoming is all about, using the body in the world to get what we want, based on what we think is good in the world. But if you cut the world out of the picture, it's not the body in and of itself. The issues are different. What is it like to have a body right here, right now? You've got the breath coming in, going out. We'll focus on the breath. And you begin to notice that has an effect on the mind. It creates feelings of pleasure or dis-ease, depending on how you breathe. And that gives you a whole different set of duties. As the Buddha said, put aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Any reference to the world right now, just put it aside. You would have just the breath and the issues of the breath. Make them your only consideration right now. And the good thing about having the breath as your frame of reference is then you can take it with you wherever you go. No matter where you are in the world, you've still got your original frame of reference, just the breath in and of itself. And all the lessons that you've learned as you've stayed with the breath will be there as well. Because this is one of our main problems as meditators. We learn a lesson and a little while later we've forgotten it. We learn something new and we forget the old things. You have to remember some of the old things that you learned really are still useful. Otherwise you keep finding yourself learning the same lesson over and over again and wondering if you'll ever learn. But if you can take those lessons and stash them away in the breath, then the association of simply being with the breath will bring them to mind. So, regardless of where you are in the world, you're still with the body in and of itself, the breath in and of itself. And all the issues that go with dealing with the breath on those terms will be right there. This is one of the ways in which mindfulness and meditation become more and more continuous. Because even when you forget, just take a breath and you're right back, right here. Close your eyes and watch your breath. Watch it all the way in, all the way out. As for anything else that may come into the mind, just let it go. The word meditate, bhavana in Pali, means to develop. And you're not trying to develop random thoughts. You're trying to develop concentration. That means staying with one thing. Some people say, I have to wait until I can find a really quiet place with no disturbances, no responsibilities, and then I can get quiet. But that's making your goodness depend on your environment. If you had to wait until the world was perfect before you could meditate, you'd never get any time to meditate. It seems very determined not to be perfect. So you've got to find and make your own space in the midst of a lot of imperfection, where the mind can settle down and try to perfect its mindfulness, its alertness, its ardency. And as for things outside, you have to let them go, at least for the time being. You have other responsibilities perhaps, but not right now. Your responsibility right now is to maintain this state of concentration. Stay with the breath. Stay with the breath again and again and again. And after a while the mind will start settling down. At first it resists. The image the Buddha gives is of a wild elephant that's been trapped and brought into the city and tied to a post. And at first all it can think of doing is getting away from the post. But instead the elephant trainers feed it good food, play it nice music, they speak politely to it, treat it well. And after all, it gets used to being around human beings. And then you can put it to work. The same with the mind. You give it something good to think about, speak nicely to it, get it to settle down. And then you can put it to work, working on its greed, aversion, and delusion. But for right now, settle down, settle down. Create a good place for the mind to settle down by the way you breathe, by the way you talk to yourself. And some of the wildness of the mind will get tamed. When the mind is willing to taste the food of concentration and enjoy the food, it's like the elephant finally being willing to eat. That they know that's when the elephant is going to live. And say in the same way, when you meditate well, and you begin to appreciate the well-being that comes from the meditation, then you know your goodness has a chance to survive. So hang on right here. Make right here a good place to be. And the mind will ultimately be willing to settle down, happy to be here, ready to do whatever work it needs to be done. Close your eyes, watch your breath. Watch it all the way in, all the way out. Make sure the mind doesn't go slipping away. This is work to be done right here. It's good work. Work in a sense of ease. You don't have to go out laboring under the sun and sweating a lot. But it does mean you have to keep watch over your mind. And for a lot of us, that's something we're not very good at. The mind wanders around all day, wherever it wants to go. So we're trying to exert some control over it. And the best way to do that, of course, is to make the breath comfortable, make it interesting. Notice different ways of breathing. Which kind of way of breathing would feel good right now? What does the body need right now? Focus on meeting its needs. As for other distractions, just let them go. You're exerting some control over your mind. This is an important part of the practice. And the mind that's out of control is like giving your car to a crazy person. The mind is what drives your life. If it's not under control, what are you going to do? Crazy person drives off the road, crazy person drives into other people. They realize it's a crazy person, but they hold you responsible for having given the car over to that person. In the same way, the mind does some crazy things, and the defilements that make it do crazy things, then they go running away. And you're left with a karma. So you have to be very careful about what you allow to order your life around. Get some control over your mind. As the Buddha said, the mind well trained brings peace, brings happiness. And this is what he means. Getting some control over what you're doing and saying and thinking. Thinking about the consequences before you think anything or say anything or do anything. In other words, exert some restraint over your mouth, over your body, over your mind. And at the first, the mind is going to rebel. It's going to feel like it's hemmed in. But what are you hemming it away from? You're putting up a fence so it doesn't go into swamps, so it doesn't go into deep chasms, so it doesn't get itself into trouble. So even though it may not feel like it's as free as it could be, still it's free in the areas that are useful, free in the areas that are skillful. So when you think of restraint as freedom, it's a lot easier to do it, a lot easier to exercise it. You're freeing yourself from all kinds of bad karma. And that's a lot better than the freedom that comes when you just let your defilements take over and let them do whatever they want. Because as I said, they're not responsible. You're the one who allows them to have power, and then you're the one who's going to reap the results. And they run away. So for the sake of your happiness, the sake of your well-being, for the sake of your freedom, learn to exercise some restraint. Get some control over your mind. And you find that the freedom that comes from a well-controlled mind may be something you wouldn't expect, but it goes deep down inside. When you focus on the breath and stay with the breath, you're building a home for the mind. The Pali term, vihara Dhamma. It's a quality that it provides your home. It's your dwelling place. And so you want to make sure that the dwelling place really does protect you from the winds of gain and loss and status and loss of status, praise, criticism, pleasure, pain. You've got to make sure it's solid. It's going to be built on a foundation of observing the precepts, that you are virtuous in your engagements with other people. Because if you're not, then when the time comes to sit down and meditate, there's a sense that something's wrong. So either you focus on what's wrong, which makes the home uncomfortable, or you try to deny it. It's like there being a leaky pipe or a weak foundation, you just try to cover it up. That doesn't stay solid very long. So this is built on the precepts. And then you decorate the home with your generosity. So it's a pleasant place to be. You can think of the times you've made sacrifices for other people. And it gives you a sense of your own worth. Whether they appreciate it or not, what matters is that you appreciate the fact that you went out of your way to help. That decorates the house. But the house itself is built out of mindfulness, alertness, ardency. We want to make sure that these things are solid. Don't let there be any lapse. A lapse in your mindfulness is like a big hole in the wall. All kinds of things can come in, invade your house. And so instead of dwelling on the breath, you find yourself dwelling someplace else. Like those pictures they have of the mouse plague in Australia right now. All it requires is a little tiny hole in the house, and all of a sudden hundreds of mice come into the house. So you want to make sure your mindfulness is consistent. You're going to stay with the breath all the way in, all the way out, and then from the next breath without fail. That way you've got a good wall, you've got a good roof, everything is solid inside. And then you make sure the breath is comfortable. So the house is a good place to stay. That way you won't go running out with the mice. So keep this image in mind that you're building a house. You want to make sure the foundation is solid, the house is a good-looking house. And it really does provide protection. That kind of house you can take as a dwelling, and you can live in this world and not get blown around by the winds. Close your eyes, watch your breath. As we meditate, we depend on strength of body and strength of mind. Strength of body comes from the breath. Strength of mind comes from your attitude. So first try to find a way of breathing that feels good. And find a way of thinking that gives strength to the mind. The Buddha talks about 5 strengths. There's conviction. The word's conviction in the Buddha's awakening, which means conviction in the principle of action. That your actions really will make a difference. Where do your actions come from? They come from the mind. So that means you have to focus on developing the mind. That's the next strength, which is persistence. You really work at this. Because the mind has good potentials and also has some pretty bad potentials. And you've got to learn how to recognize which is which and learn how to develop the good ones. Let go of the bad ones. That requires mindfulness, which is the third strength. That you keep these principles in mind. And that way, when you do it, the mind will finally settle down, and that's when you gain strength of concentration. This, of all the different factors of the path, is the one the Buddha compares to food. He talks about your practice as being like a fortress. You've got the soldiers of right effort, you've got the gatekeeper, who's mindfulness. They need food. They have their weapons, which is the knowledge you've gained. But even with the best weapons, if they don't have food, that's not going to go very far. So the food is concentration. Let the mind rest for a while. And it's not just resting, it's also mindful and alert at the same time, which means it's still and gathering its strength. Like an electric generator. You look at it, it's not doing anything. It's humming, but inside it's spinning around. And John Lee gives a comparison. When you're alert in the course of concentration, you try to look at the body, look at the mind, look at the body, look at the mind, make sure they stay together. That way you generate power. And then that becomes the basis for discernment, which cuts through things that weigh the mind down. So this is how you feed the mind. This is how you give strength to the mind. Because of the two kinds of strength, strength of the body, strength of the mind. Strength of the mind is a lot more important. The strength of the body is going to have to deteriorate at some point. It wears out all the time. But we're used to being able to get some of it back, get some of it back. But there will come a time when you can't get it back. At that point you have to depend solely on strength of mind. So work on that, on your attitudes. The conviction that yes, your actions can make a difference. And so the effort that's put into acting in skillful ways is more than repaid. When you have that attitude, then you can fight off all the unskillful sides of the mind and come out victorious. The fortress is safe because the soldiers are well fed, well armed. Anything unskillful that one's trying to make its way in just can't make its way in. Close your eyes. Watch your breath. Try to be on familiar terms with the breath. The Buddha says you want to find good friends. It's an important part of the practice. So make the breath your friend. Become friends with the breath. It can do all kinds of things for you if you get to know it. But as with any friendship, it takes time. As the Buddha said, if you want to know somebody, you have to spend a lot of time with them. And see them in different situations to see what kind of endurance they have, what kind of wisdom they have, what kind of purity they have. And it's the same principle of the breath. If you really want to know what the breath can do for you, what its good qualities are, you have to watch it over time. You can look at the breath for years and keep on learning new things about it. But after a while, you begin to get a sense of it, even if you don't know everything about the breath. But you learn a lot of good things about it. It's a good place for the mind to stay, because we live in this world where it's very difficult to find anything that's really secure, anything that's really solid. So we have to find something solid inside. And the breath is always there, even though it's coming in, going out. The fact that it's with the body, it's one of the elements of the body. It means as long as you're alive, you're going to be with the breath. You can be with the breath. So take advantage of it. Of the elements of the body, it's the one that you have the most control over. So get to know it well. Be on good terms with it, and you'll be surprised at all the good things it can do for you. It can provide you with a good, comfortable place to stay when you're in pain. A good, solid place to stay when the world around you is changing fast. Something soothing when you need to be soothed, energizing when you need to be energized. It's a really good friend. So So take the time to get to know it well. The day should start with thoughts of goodwill, reminding ourselves that we want a true happiness. That's how we show goodwill for ourselves. We're not going to settle for second best or third best, or for what most people do of 20th, 30th best. We want the best kind of happiness, a happiness that lasts, a happiness that doesn't turn on you. And we realize that for our happiness to last, it can't depend on the suffering of the other people and the beings. So we have to have goodwill for them too. And one of the best ways of showing goodwill is through restraint. We tend to think of goodwill as a big, expansive state of mind, and it is. But also know certain boundaries. The goodwill is boundless. But you have to realize that your actions have to have boundaries. Certain things you will do and will not do. And the reason that you won't do the things that you won't do is because you know they're going to be harmful. In other words, you can't look for happiness in that direction. So hold yourself back. And we tend to think of restraint as confining. But actually it's just keeping us from falling into cesspools, stumbling over cows. You may know that passage in the canon, where the Buddha is talking about having common sense, not to put yourself in danger, not to go out at night, say, where you're subject to stumbling over cows and falling into cesspools. In other words, you know how to avoid problems that don't really have to be taken on. In the same way here, if you see that there's a certain advantage that would come from killing or stealing or lying, you say, okay, that has nothing to do with me. I'm going to look for my advantage, I'm going to look for my well-being someplace else. That way you're kind to yourself, kind to other beings, showing goodwill for yourself, goodwill for other beings. This is the whole principle of the precepts. You hold yourself back from unskillful behavior because you realize that it doesn't help anybody at all, and it's actually for your good that you're holding yourself back. If you really want to benefit other people, you get them to hold back. Ajaan Fuang, when he was teaching here, would often stress this point of restraint. He saw Thai people coming to America and lifting a lot of the restraints that kept them well-behaved back in Thailand. And he saw it as a real waste. They really weren't looking after themselves. So he'd constantly stress this theme again and again and again, this theme of restraint, and how much happiness comes from restraint. And that goes against a lot of our urges, but a lot of our urges are inspired by what? Greed, aversion, and delusion. So we have to look at restraint as a type of happiness, realizing that it embodies goodwill for ourselves and for other people. When you have that attitude as you go through the day, you find that the day is a lot lighter. When you run up against a wall inside like this is, nope, that's out of bounds. You learn to look inbounds, and you find that the resources for happiness are here. Because that's one of the other advantages of restraint, is instead of looking outside and things that are going to cause trouble, you look inside for where the real sources of happiness can be found. So when you run up against a fence like that, don't resent the fence. Just turn around and look at the area that you're trying to get out of. Maybe there's something good here. Dig down inside. And as Ajaan Lee says, you may run into some rocks under the ground. In other words, you might find there are pains as you sit and meditate, as you look for happiness inside. But underneath the rock, he says, there's diamond. And you figure out how to get around the rock. Not just give up and run away, but keep on digging, digging, digging. You'll find that there's a way to get to the diamond. And that's because you turned your attention inside. Close your eyes, watch your breath. And any thoughts that would come in to tell you, go someplace else, you can just put them aside. You're working on a higher pleasure here. Most of the pleasures we have in the world are sensual pleasures, having to do with the pleasures of sight, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, ideas. But we're looking for something higher. This is called the pleasure of form, as you inhabit the body from within. What's good about this pleasure is that it doesn't require that things outside have to be just so. It requires a certain amount of peace in the environment. Although when you get really good at the concentration, you can get the mind quiet in any environment. It doesn't place any burdens on anybody else. And it's not the sort of thing that anybody else can take away from you. And it poses no dangers. Some of the pleasures we look for in the world outside are pretty dangerous. We have to realize that some pleasures have to be put aside if you want something of higher worth. As the Buddha said, it's one of the basic principles of wisdom. When you see that there's a greater pleasure that comes from putting aside or abandoning a lesser pleasure, the wise person abandons the lesser pleasure for the sake of the greater one. It's a verse in the Dhammapada. There was a British scholar who translated the Dhammapada, and he got to this verse, and he put a footnote. He said, this couldn't possibly be the meaning of this verse. The terms must mean something else. Because he said, everybody knows that you have to sacrifice lesser pleasures for the sake of greater ones. Well, people may know that, but how many people actually live in line with that? And because people don't like this idea, they live as if they didn't know. But we have to realize that life is like a garden. You can plant different plants in the garden, but there are some plants that will kill the other plants. So if you like roses and you like lilies, but you also like eucalyptus, watch out. The eucalyptus will kill the roses and the lilies. So you have to decide which one you want. Which one gives the greater pleasure. And then you're willing to put aside the lesser pleasures for the sake of the greater one. That's how we bring intelligence to issues of happiness. Happiness is an area where we tend to be pretty foolish. Something strikes our fancy and we go for it. There's a book that came out a while back called The Intelligent Heart. It was about Buddhism. And that's precisely what the Buddha teaches. You're intelligent not only in your mind, but also in your heart. You look at the things that you want, and you have to get some order to the things that you want. And you learn how to make yourself desire things that are going to lead to long-term happiness, and learn how not to desire things that will lead to short-term happiness but long-term pain. So we try to bring intelligence to the issues of the heart, the happiness we want, the things that we will in life. And that way the mind and the heart become an entirety. The Pali term for mind, and actually there are two terms, citta and mano, and both of them have that double meaning, both heart and mind. Whereas we here in the West tend to separate the two. It's good that we bring them back together, so we can be wise in the happiness we look for, and we can use our wisdom for genuine well-being. Try to stay with the breath. Watch out for any inclination to go someplace else. Because wherever you're going, the Buddha said we go with our cravings as our friend. And the problem with craving is it doesn't come along just one friend. It drags along a lot of other companions. It's like those people who, in the days when we would have guests coming to stay, they'd call up and say, do you have a space? And we'd look at the calendar, yes, there was one space. So we say, okay, you can come. And then they would say, okay, I'm bringing along 5 friends. Craving is like that. You crave something, and you realize that that thing that you crave has a world in which it exists. And in order to get it, you have to take on an identity in that world. You suddenly find yourself committed to all kinds of things. Make another comparison. It's like getting married and suddenly realize you have in-laws. Because with the craving, there's the clinging. With the clinging, there's birth, aging, illness, death. And if you decide you don't like that, well, you can crave non-becoming, but then craving is going to take you back to another state of becoming. It's got you surrounded on all sides. So we meditate to get out of that dilemma. As the Buddha said, if you go for becoming, it's going to lead to more becoming. If you go for non-becoming, it's going to lead to more becoming. If you go for sensuality, it's going to lead to becoming. So where are you going to go? So you just learn how to look at things as they arise and see them as a process. This gives rise to that, that gives rise to this. And you begin to see that the process is all very makeshift, very unreliable, very tenuous. And you begin to lose all interest. So you don't have to destroy the becomings end on their own. And as long as you don't get interested in terms of becomings, then you're fine. Now this sounds fairly abstract, but it's basically what happens when the mind drops the breath and goes for something else. It's like taking birth in that little world, and then you go off. And if you realize that you don't like that and you want to destroy it, well, that gets you into another world. But if you realize that I can just pull out, I don't have to get involved in the process. See it as a process. And that's the door out. So this is why we practice right concentration together with right view. Concentration gives us a quiet place where we can see this process clearly. Otherwise, we just go through it day after day after day without any clear sense of what's happening. But when the mind is still, you can see it happening. And when you have right view about this, that these are things you have to watch out for, when you recognize your craving as a cause of suffering, then you can start pulling out of that friendship. And it's only then that you're really free. Close your eyes and bring your attention to the breath. Try to stay right here. Know when it's coming in, know when it's going out. Know if it's comfortable, if it's not. If it's not comfortable, you can change. Make it longer, shorter, faster, slower, deeper, more shallow. Try it out for a while. Of course, we're coming to the meditation not totally unprepared. We have our background. As the Buddha said, the best support for mindfulness and concentration is right view and virtue. Right view is when you understand that the suffering that weighs the mind down doesn't come from outside, it comes from within the mind itself. When you can think in those ways, you're not always trying to figure out, well, who's to blame outside for your suffering. You look inside. It's not a matter of blame. It's simply realizing you lack skill. That changes not only the way you relate to yourself, but also the way you relate to other people. This is where virtue comes in. You realize that you could make some gains in the world outside. You could get ahead of the world outside by breaking the precepts, but it's not worth it. So you make up your mind that this is a promise you make to yourself. No killing, no stealing, no illicit sex, no lying, no taking intoxicants. This way you look after your own well-being, and other people benefit as well. This pair of right view and virtue appears many times in the canon. It's not only good support for your meditation. The Buddha said it's your most important possession, because there could be reasons for you to break the precepts in terms of your health, your wealth, your relatives. But the Buddha said it's not worth the exchange, because we're going to have to lose our wealth, our health, and our relatives at some point anyhow. But if we lose our virtue and our right view, then we're in a lot of trouble. Similarly for the causes for living together in peace. Having right view in common, having virtue in common, makes life very peaceful. very harmonious. So these two factors are causes for harmony inside, harmony outside. Well-being inside, well-being outside. We look for peace in the world, we'll look inside. It's got to start here. When you realize that you're suffering because of things you're doing, you can live more peacefully with other people. And when you maintain your virtue, there's no reason for people to be upset with you, and when you look back on your own behavior, there's nothing with which you can criticize yourself. So we're looking for peace and harmony. This is where you look. These very important possessions. And you benefit both outside and in. Get your mind to gather right here. It's when the mind is gathered together that it has strength. Otherwise it's little bits and pieces scattered around. And each of those little bits and pieces on its own is not very strong. But when you get them all together, they support one another. Your thinking is right here. Your perceptions are right here. Your feelings are right here. Your awareness is focused right here. You can gain a sense of wholeness because you've got one object. You've got the breath coming in, breath going out. Just try to maintain that because it's healing for the body and healing for the mind. The mind gets wounded all the time. The Buddha's image is of someone being shot by arrows. The fact that we have our senses exposing us to all kinds of things coming in from outside, that's bad enough. It's this constant barrage of input. But then on top of that, all the things that we get on our screens. Everything is designed to get you upset, worked up. You've got to get yourself worked down. Calm yourself down. Not so that you don't care about things, but simply so that your strength is not wasted by other people's concerns. Because you've got one big issue that you're responsible for, and that's the fact that you're creating suffering. Even though your intention is to create happiness, still you create suffering, and you want to know why. And it's because part of the mind is hidden from itself, and when the mind is scattered out various places, then it's easy for greed, aversion, and delusion to stay hidden. But when everything is gathered together here, then all the different parts of the mind can see one another. It's like that image they have of the day the Buddha went up to the Dawadingsa heaven to teach his mother, and that day he came down. There was a brief moment where all the different levels of the universe could see one another. The beings of hell could see, well, this place just isn't just hell. Human beings can see, oh, there are heavens and there are hells. And when you get the whole picture like that, then you can act a lot more skillfully. Because you understand some of the broader implications of what you're doing and saying and thinking. So try to keep your mind gathered in one as much as you can, not only while you're sitting here with your eyes closed, but as you go through the day. You may have other responsibilities, but approach those responsibilities from this point, where it's gathered together as much as you can. Because it's not the case as you go through the day that you can think only about what you're doing. You're already thinking about all kinds of things. Well, drop those. Everything that's extraneous. And whatever parts of the mind don't need to be focused on your particular task, you keep them right here. That way, as you come to the day, you come from a position of strength. And the mind isn't quite so wounded as it has been in the past. Close your eyes and watch your breath. Watch the breath all the way in, all the way out. Remember to stay right here. That's what mindfulness means. And then watch the breath to see how it feels. Does it feel good? You can try longer breathing, shorter breathing, fast, slow, heavy, light. Try to find what rhythm of breathing feels good right now. You're giving the mind a place to stay, a safe place to stay. Because if it wanders around outside, who knows what's going to happen to it? So it's like a child. You want to keep it home, you try locking up the doors and the windows, it's going to find a way of picking the locks. And then when it goes, it's not going to come back. But if you give it something to play with, then you can open the windows, open the doors, and as long as it's interested in its playthings, it'll be happy to stay. Otherwise, if it goes outside, who knows who's going to kidnap it, who's going to run over it. Otherwise, you go wandering outside. There are all the moods of the world, topics of the world. And a lot of them are designed to give rise to greed, anger, delusion. You look on the internet, you look on TV, you look in the media, and they're doing their best to excite some kind of unskillful emotion. So you need some protection. You need a safe place to stay. And here's the breath. This is how you feel the body from within. It's a place that nobody else can come, and it means you don't have to push anybody else out of the way. This is your space. So make the most of it. We have the elements of earth, water, wind, and fire here. There's warmth, there's coolness, heaviness, and then there's energy. And you can ask yourself, how can I use the energy of the breath to bring things into balance? That way you've got a good place to stay. When the body's a good place to stay, then the mind is in a much better mood. It's more likely to see what's skillful and what's not skillful, and be willing to do what's skillful and to abandon what's not. It's when the mind is in a bad mood that it just goes for whatever. Whatever strikes its fancy, it takes. Good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't care. As long as it likes something, it'll go for it. But here you're giving the mind something good right away, a comfortable sense of breath. And think of the comfortable sense of breath filling the body. And then when the temptation comes to act on unskillful intentions, you realize, well, there's no reason. There's no appeal. You're not drawn to it. This way the mind becomes a lot more reliable. So give it some safety and you'll be able to depend on it. It'll give you some safety too. Otherwise, if the mind is untrained, it's like you have an enemy inside the house, or an untrained animal inside the house, and it's going to tear things up and leave messes all over the place. But if the mind is trained, you can put it to work, and it'll do the work that you need to do. When we meditate, we're trying to give the mind some strength. We're convinced of the fact that our lives are shaped by our actions, and of course our actions come from the mind. We're responsible for what we do and say and think. And so when we meditate, we're taking responsibility for that. Looking after the qualities of the mind, because the qualities of the mind determine what you're going to do and say and think. So what have you got here? Are you alert? Are you mindful? Are you scattered? Try to take stock of the mind and see what needs to be done. If you're already alert, continue. Try to develop that quality even further. If you find that you're all over the place, think in a way that gets you more riveted in the present moment. And that way the mind can settle down. It's when the mind can settle down that it gains strength. But it has to settle down with mindfulness and alertness. I mean, it does gain some strength from falling asleep and being quiet. But if you really want it to be strong, you have to exercise it as well. Just like the body needs rest in order to get strong, but it also needs exercise. So you're exercising your mindfulness, alertness, and your ardency. to get the mind still. When the mind is still, it begins to see itself more clearly. This is where we see the Buddha's teaching that if you want to attain the Dhamma, it requires both commitment and reflection. The commitment is getting the mind to settle down, and everything that's needed to get it to settle down, keep it there. And then the reflection is when you watch it, what's working, what's not working. And when you've settled down, what still needs to be done. It's not the case you get the mind quiet once and that's it. You have to get it quiet again and again and again, and you have to figure out why is it that the mind gets disturbed from its quietude. Now, part of the reason, of course, is you have other duties outside. But they don't have to disturb the mind. The mind could maintain its center if you were really skillful. So where's the lack of skill? Look for that. Get a little bit careless in how you think, careless in how you look after yourself. That's where there's an opening for your old habits to come in. And the old habits weaken you. So we're looking for strength. This is where we look for it, right here. And John Lee makes the point, we depend on strength of body and strength of mind. But there comes a point where you can't depend on strength of body anymore. It's just going to go. What do you do then? You have to hold to your strength of mind. The more you develop it now, the more you're likely to have when you really need it. So exercise the mind and get it some rest. And it'll be healthy and strong, able to do the work that needs to be done.